And now joining us live via satellite from Vancouver, please welcome the Minister of Environment and Climate Change Strategy for the British Columbia area, the Honourable George HEYMAN. Minister HEYMAN, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for the invitation, Sam. It's great to be here.
All right, let's start with Bill 51. I really want to know a little bit more about this. As Minister of Environment and Climate Change Strategy in British Columbia, now you introduced a new bill. It's called Bill 51. It's also known as the Environment Assessment Act. What is it actually designed to do?
Well, it's designed to do a whole lot of things, Sam, but I see the Environmental Assessment Act and climate change accountability as going hand in hand. What we wanted to do was ensure the public that they could have trust in our assessment of major projects, that we would do it in a transparent way, paying attention to both science and Indigenous knowledge. We also in British Columbia have pretty much all of the Indigenous nations, but a couple, never signed treaties with the government, either previously or recently. So we want to ensure that they play a significant role in the decision-making process and gain benefits from projects. We also put in a number of key factors, including assessing project proposals against their impacts on our legislated greenhouse gas emission targets and our climate change strategy, as well as the impacts on future generations, and ensuring that the decision makers have to actually explain how they factored those decision points into the final decision on a project and the conditions that will govern that project. So in short, we want to ensure that we can have good projects approved in a timely manner, minimize discord with communities, with Indigenous peoples, and ensure that the public can trust the process, and we're accounting for climate change impacts as well as a host of other environmental and social impacts in our project assessments.
Well, it all sounds important. The latest figures, though, show that BC's carbon emissions are actually continuing to increase. So what can we do? What's our overall strategy to kind of take that in the opposite direction?
Well, since my government took office 16 months ago, we decided we had to return to a time when British Columbia actually began a program and some measures to tackle climate change. In 2008, British Columbia became the first jurisdiction in North America to put a price on carbon with a carbon tax. And our economy did well at the same time that the tax was rising. We had a government that was in office for about 6 years, and we saw in 4 of the 5 past years emissions rising instead of going down because the government ceased to pay attention to climate considerations. So we took office. We announced that we would begin raising the carbon tax gradually once again. We legislated new emission reduction targets to go with a 2050 target. And we also want to make sure that we have 2030 and 2040 targets. Later this week, we'll be announcing a strategy with key measures that have quantified emission reductions associated with them that will put us on a path to meet those targets. But we're making it part of a clean, diverse, modern economy strategy that will show British Columbians that there is hope. There's advantage not just in the future, but in the present. We're going to ensure that our existing resource industries minimize their carbon emissions, and that new technological advances through BC's clean tech industry can help with that, as well as reducing emissions overall. In BC, we have mostly clean energy. It's not like jurisdictions that are getting off coal, so we're making these emission reductions by being more efficient in transportation, more efficient in our industries, and more efficient in reducing energy use in buildings and making them net zero.
And it's so important to have those long-term targets, those 30, 40, 50-year targets ahead. Now, something that I read was about social housing, and this was so impressive to me. You recently announced that over the next 10 years, you're going to spend something like $1 billion to make social housing not only more comfortable, but more efficient. So what's the plan? How are you going to do all of that?
Well, the plan is to work with nonprofits, with community housing advocates, as well as local municipalities in British Columbia to make these changes in social housing, which supports people in lower incomes in British Columbia. That's a 10-year plan. We've built new social housing. We're going to renovate some of the old housing stock, make them more comfortable, make them more energy efficient. We also have additional plans to spend money on building new rental housing for moderate and market-based incomes. All of this we want to do in an energy efficient manner. We want to introduce standards that will have new builds net zero ready within a matter of 14 or 15 years. But for people who live in social housing, they deserve to have good housing, they deserve to have affordable housing, they deserve comfortable housing, and all of us have an interest in reducing emissions through buildings, many of which are decades old and were built to low energy efficiency standards. So all of this is part of showing a commitment to reducing emissions while supporting our construction industry and BC citizens.
That whole thing just made my heart feel good just to hear you say it, because you're exactly right. These are the people that we should be helping.
Great.
Now, as the former head of Sierra Club in BC, and now as Minister of Environment and Climate Change, you've been at this really for a very long time. And so you can not only talk just to BC, but about Canada-wide. What are some of the biggest challenges you see facing Canada as in its entirety?
Well, as I've said, there's a lot of jurisdictions in Canada that are dependent on fossil fuels for energy, but they're also dependent on the extraction of fossil fuels as a mainstay of their economy. We're seeing in other jurisdictions in Canada, as well as in the United States and other countries, a turning away from environmental action, from climate action, due to a belief that, it will hurt the economy or that people will suffer. We're trying to change the channel on that in British Columbia. We're trying to show that we can make the transition. We can ensure that our existing resource industries are energy efficient and reduce their emissions, that we can build a more diverse and modern economy, and we can do it while providing good jobs for people, making their lives more affordable and making their lives more comfortable. I think we need to give people hope. And if we give people hope in a program that actually tackles climate change and reduces emissions while making our province and our communities better, we can show the rest of Canada that they can do it too. We can show the rest of the world that it can be done too. I would say the biggest challenge is a lack of inspiration, a lack of hope, and a belief that we have to choose between the environment and the future or today's economy. I believe that's a false dichotomy, and anything we can do to break down that false dichotomy, I think, serves us all.
I've loved the conversation. Thank you for your leadership, Minister HEYMAN, and thank you for being a part of our 24-hour reality broadcast. We appreciate your time.